Hi everybody, I hope that you're doing well. We are into session 4 of our Golden Thread series, can you believe it? At the end of this video, you will be halfway through the series. I hope that you've been enjoying it. I hope that it's excited you to read the Bible and find out that golden thread for yourself. Well, today we're going to be thinking about Abraham and the promise that he's been given. But before we do, let's look at the basics. And today we're going to be looking at how to read the Bible. 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 15 says this: "Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who does not need to be ashamed and who correctly handles the word of truth." The word of truth is the Bible. So the big question is, how can we correctly handle this Bible? For some of us, this is our first steps into the Bible. So how do we know how to correctly or incorrectly handle it? Well, I want to encourage you that it's your decision to choose to correctly handle the Bible. And I'm going to illustrate it by using this measuring jug here, okay? The measuring jug is the Bible. The measuring jug has a form, it's set. The Bible does not change, okay? It is timeless and it is solid. Now, we can be one of two things. The first way is the incorrect way, okay? We can come to the Bible a lot like this brick. It looks just like me, doesn't it? Yeah. As I come to the Bible, if I'm coming like a brick, I'm coming with my own opinions, my own ideas, my own preconceived illusions, ideas, whatever you want to call it. It could be something as simple as, I think God is an old guy that sits on a cloud with a beard and plays a harp or throws down thunderbolts, because that's what I've seen in my culture, okay? That's what I've seen portrayed on cartoons and all that kind of stuff. So maybe as I come to the Bible, I'm a lot like this brick, that I have these opinions and I'm not really willing to budge on them. So as the brick comes to the measuring jug, I want to try and fill the measuring jug with the brick. But as you can see, it's not fitting very well at all. So I'll take it out and I'll try it this way. Still nothing. It's not going to work. The only way I can get the brick to match up with the measuring jug so that they're in line with each other is if I actually heat up the jug and form it around the brick. Now that is sadly a very common way people read the Bible, and even sadder, a lot of Bible teachers and preachers and high profile people will actually incorrectly handle the Bible, and they will use this. The big theological term for it is Eisegesis, and it means that you put into the Bible, okay? For example, here, I would put myself in and then I would form the Bible or form the jug around me. So we don't want that. We don't want to read the Bible in a way that we are making it say what we want it to say. Now be careful, because if you hear things like, now culturally what it says in the Bible is no longer relevant today, or we've read what it says, but I actually think it might mean this. They may be red flags to identifying those people who are incorrectly handling the Bible. They've read what it says, quite often very, very clearly, but they don't want to do that, or it makes them feel uncomfortable. So they'll tweak it to match with our culture, our society, or even their personal opinions. The second way that we could read the Bible, and I want to encourage you to read it like this, is like sand, okay? Still the same material, by the way. So here, as we begin to fill the jug, the sand starts to take the shape of the jug. And we can read the Bible like that as well. You see, if we come into the Bible with an open mind, as we read it, we can be shaped and molded by it. Now, this type of reading is called exegesis, and it means to be led out. So where eisegesis is to put in, here in the Bible, as we read it in an exegesis way, we are led out of the Bible. We are led from the Bible. It steers us, it guides us, it shapes and it molds us. Now the big question is, why would we do that? Why would we actually want to be shaped by this book? Well, Hebrews chapter 4 verse 12 says this: "The word of God is living and active." In other words, that this book is not some work of fiction. It's not some wisdom words for good wishes. It's not just some kind of artwork either. This and what's found within its pages is actually living and active. Don't forget that in the first session, we said that the Bible claims that it is breathed out by God. So it is God speaking to us. So it shouldn't be a surprise at all that actually as we read it, we should be transformed by it. But we should also treat it with absolute respect and come to it and listen, knowing that we're actually hearing God's word as we read it. Well, before we carry on, let's have a quick recap of where we've been. Session number 1, we thought about the makeup of the Bible. Session number 2, we thought about God being the creator and making everything good. However, sin entered into the earth and the whole of creation now groans under the curse of sin. It's longing for Jesus Christ to return when he will make all things new. And in session number 3, we thought about that man called Noah who built a huge ark, meaning box. He built a big floating boat box, and he filled it full of animals, and God rescued Noah through a flood. Well, today we are going to think about a man called Abraham, but as we meet him here in chapter 12, he is called Abram. Now, Abram is quite interesting because what's happened so far is the Bible in Genesis has talked about creation as a whole, but now it zooms in into one man, and it continues to follow his family line right the way through the Old Testament and into the Gospels in the New Testament. This is really interesting. So we need to ask the question right at the start, don't we? Is God only for Abram and his family? Because if he is, where do we fit in? Well, let's go on that journey because you'll soon find out the answer. In fact, in chapter 12 of Genesis here, you'll find the answer right from the very beginning. You see, God calls this man Abram, and he says to him, "Go from your country and from your kindred and from your father's house to the land that I will show you." Now he lays out some promises, and these will govern Abram's life. He says, "I will make of you a great nation," promise number 1. "I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." Promise number 2. God tells him to leave his family. He's about 75 at this point. Sarai, his wife, is 65. There's a 10-year age difference. And they are set to leave. They would leave with their cattle and their possessions and their servants and everything else. And God says, "I've got a land for you." But he hasn't actually told them where it is. He just says, "I will show you the land." So Abraham and his family are going to pick up their stuff. They're going to go out on faith in God. And as they go, he gives them these 2 promises, doesn't he? That he's going to be a great nation. So he's going to be the father of many, many children. They're going to turn into a country of themselves. And that through him, all families on the earth will be blessed. Now that sounds amazing. However, Abram doesn't actually have any children. So how could he be, at the age of 75, how could he be the father of a great nation? Abram picks up his stuff and goes on the journey, seemingly trusting in the promises of God. But you know, Abram is so real. He's just like you and I. You see, we haven't even got to the end of chapter 12 yet, when he walks into Egypt with his wife Sarai and says to her, "Listen, you're beautiful, and I think that people might kill me when they see how beautiful you are so that they could take you to be their wife." So he says to her, "Let's just say that you're my sister." Abram completely goes back on on trusting in God, in the promise that God's given him that he'll be the father of a great nation. Yet he doesn't have any children yet, and he's already worried that he's not going to make it out of Egypt. You know, his faith waxes and wanes, and yet God is faithful all the way through. In fact, not only does God give him the promises here at the very beginning to be the father of a great nation, and through him all families on the earth will be blessed, but he also continues to give him promises as well. Look at this in Genesis chapter 15, verse 5. You can read it along with me. It says this, and he brought him outside, that's Abram. God brings him outside of his tent and said, look toward the heaven and number the stars, if you're able to number them. And then God says to him, so shall your offspring be. What an amazing promise. What Abram's response? And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. You see, God never moved. And as God gave him the promise again, Abram trusts in God once again. And then, in chapter 16, we read that Sarai says to Abram, listen, we don't have any children. I have this servant called Hagar. Why don't you have a child with Hagar? And so he does. He knows the promise that God's given, that he's not just going to be the father of a great nation, but if you could count the stars, he's going to have more children than the stars in the sky. And yet here, just a chapter on again, he's taking the promise into his own hands and trying to make it come true by his own means. This child called Ishmael is born, and God speaks to Abram again. And he says to him, listen, I'm going to make a covenant with you. Your great nation is not going to come through Ishmael, but it is going to come through one of your own children between you and Sarai. He makes this promise with Abram, and in that moment changes his name. You see, Abram has a meaning to it, but Abraham has a much closer meaning to the promise that was given to him. Verse 5 of chapter 17. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, which means father of a multitude. Within that chapter, you'll also read that God puts a special mark upon Abraham. He circumcises him, which means he removes his foreskin. We won't go into too much detail about that, don't worry. But what then happens from then on is that every child born within Abraham's line, every male child is circumcised. It's a mark upon their body of a promise that God has made them. Well, as we come to the second half of chapter 17 through into chapter 18, God promises a son in greater detail. At this point, Abraham is 99 years old and Sarah is around 90 years old. And men come and arrive, the servants of God. They arrive before Abraham, and Abraham offers them some food and everything else. And he's standing outside of his tent, which is why I'm in front of my tent here. And he says, the men say to Abraham, this time next year when we come back, you will have a son. God is giving details to his promise. Now imagine a man touching on 100 and his wife touching on 90 coming out and saying, actually, we're going to have a child. Yeah, it'd be all over the papers, wouldn't it? It'd be all over the news. And no doubt it would be the butt of many jokes. You know, as Sarah was listening within the tent, she heard the promise being made again, that by this time next year they would have a son. And she thought, how could this be? And so what does she do? She laughs. Now God hears her laughing. And she says, I didn't laugh. But God says, you did. Now that's interesting because of what happens next. You see, a year later, a baby is born. Now, this week, I had the great idea of having my baby son's face put on a cushion, okay? In fact, I got both sons put on cushions, but this is definitely the creepiest cushion we own in our house. Okay, so here we go. The baby is born. This is my baby, okay? He's 3 months old next week. Well, the baby is born. And why did we talk about laughter before? Well, it's because they actually called their son Laughter. That was his name. In Hebrew, it's Isaac, meaning laughter. You see, nothing is impossible with God. God keeps his promises. Do you remember? God said that you will be the father of a great nation, and through you, all families on the earth will be blessed. So here is Abraham, way past the age of having children, having a small son. Now it's just one. But through Isaac, he will have children. And his children will have children. And his children will have children. And eventually, when they leave Egypt, free from slavery, there will be more than 1 million of them. And still, the nation will continue to grow. God keeps his promises. Now, just before we go any further and think about that golden thread, let's just carry on reading, because as we get to chapter 21, Isaac has been born, and yet in chapter 22, God calls Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. Now this is a crazy story. In fact, it makes us feel very, very uncomfortable. But Abraham gets up the next morning after he's been told what to do. He takes his son, he takes the fire, he takes the wood, and he goes onto the mountain. He puts the wood on an altar that he builds. He puts his son on the altar. He takes a knife, and then God calls out to him. Listen to this. God calls out to him and says, Abraham, Abraham. And Abraham says, here I am, ready to sacrifice his son. He says, do not lay a hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And in that moment, God points him towards a thicket where a ram has been stuck. And he takes his son off the altar and he places the ram upon it, and it is sacrificed, and he worships God. It's an interesting story, isn't it? And if we go to the New Testament, all the way through to Hebrews chapter 11, it talks about Abraham acting in faith upon this. Listen to what he says. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall all your offspring be named. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. Can you see that? That Abraham was a man who trusted in the steadfast promises of God. Even when it seemed impossible, God had shown himself again and again to Abraham, so that when he said, sacrifice your son, Abraham reasoned, well, I do it, and then God will raise him back to life, because God has made a promise that I can trust. So where is our golden thread found throughout the story, the true story of Abraham? It's actually found in a number of places, and we can see lots of foreshadows, but let's just focus upon the promise for a minute. You see, God said that Abraham was going to be the father of a great nation, and that through him all families on the earth would be blessed. And as we look through the line of Abraham, we see that many, many, many generations on, Jesus is born. In Luke chapter 2, it talks about Jesus being born in Bethlehem, and out on the hillside there are shepherds. And an angel appears to the shepherds and says this, fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all the people. And this is the great news. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Saviour, who is Christ, the Lord. And this will be a sign for you. You will find the baby wrapped in swaddling cloths and lying in a manger. You see, Jesus is the fulfillment of the promise that Abraham was given, that all families on the earth will be blessed by Jesus coming and dying for them upon the cross. And now every family, no matter what nation, no matter what language, no matter what background, has the choice to choose to trust in Jesus Christ, have their sins forgiven, and to be blessed by knowing Him. How about you? Have you chosen to trust in Jesus? Is your family blessed because of Jesus Christ? You see, Jesus actually brought that blessing through a sacrifice. And this takes us right back to Isaac. You see, God said, "Now I know that you were willing to give up your son, your one and only son." And although Isaac was not sacrificed, a ram took his place. There are two parallels here. The first one is that God was willing to give up his one and only son, and he was sacrificed. Jesus is otherwise known as the sacrificial lamb. And so here we see a glimpse of the love and the cost that it was for Jesus to die upon the cross. But we also see that little parallel where Isaac was taken off the altar and the ram was placed upon it, and that bore the punishment, that took the cost. You see, Jesus took our place upon that cross because of our sin. We deserve the punishment that he endured, but he did it for us because of love. He loves us so much, and now he's calling us to trust in him.